Hello and welcome to this first presentation on epistemic inquiry. These are my website and my email if you want to get in touch with me at any point. So my first big question is why epistemic inquiry as the most fruitful basis for developing thinking in any science curriculum? There's been much discussion in the last probably 10 years about the role of knowledge and the idea that thinking must be based on prior knowledge that has been taught. And so there's been a big movement towards the idea of direct instruction that is very, very strongly guided. And there's been a lot of arguments against inquiry-based learning and the concept of the minimal guidance that it affords. I hope during this presentation to show that epistemic inquiry actually deals with knowledge and inquires into what students know, what they're capable of learning, where they are in their learning trajectories, and it gives an all-round basis to understand what the nature of science learning and science learners. I've always been inspired by the work of David Alsobel, who critiqued the idea of how we move from rote learning to meaningful learning, and this quote, the idea that we need to ascertain what learners already know. I would also argue that we need to learn not just what they know, but how they know, how they think. And we should ascertain what this is and teach him, we would say him, her, or them accordingly. So that is going to be throughout this idea of epistemic inquiry, is getting learners to know what they know and don't know, for teachers to understand what their students know and how they know it, and perhaps where the gaps in their knowledge and thinking are. So this is the psychological, educational psychological thinking behind epistemic inquiry. Now getting into the more details of what actually epistemic inquiry is, how it relates to the nature of science as exposed through the three worlds of Karl Popper, and also the work of Derek Hodgson, who looked at the different facets that thinking plays a role in learning science, learning about science, and doing science. So they're the main key elements of this first presentation. Okay, Jonathan Osborne from King's College and Pierre Kim from Durham University looked at the very cognitive history of how science and the way we think about science is developed. And they saw that there were four big questions that had gone through the ages that really are the deep cultural questions of science. Questions of what exists, how do things happen? So we have the ontological and causal structure of our thinking. And then the epistemological, how do we come to know? And here we obviously look at the different methodologies that science uses in different contexts. And then the idea of how we can, or should we, apply with the knowledge that science gives us. I said that the nature of science would be well illustrated by what are called the three worlds of Karl Popper. Karl Popper is very, very largely known for his idea that science must be a falsification-based methodology. And these three worlds are not so well known. He puts forward the idea that the physical objects, this is in a way the subject matter, what exists as phenomena for us to explain, and that this links often with our own human subjective experience. And for me this is incredibly important, that there's a raft of research that shows students subjectively experience nature and its phenomena in ways that are perhaps different than what we might call the objective knowledge that's enshrined in our curriculum, the theories, the models, the principles of science. And for me, this gave a really good structure to look at how you could introduce physical objects, so the what exists question is introduced at a very concrete phenomenological level, that then we start to look at how we come to know by looking at what and exposing the subjective experience of students, and that we use a lot of language as a bridge between the subjective experience of students and the kind of objective knowledge that we're aiming towards in our science curriculum. We will see in the second presentation how this structure is put into action in the way that lessons are planned using physical objects and phenomena to elicit the views and the predictions and explanations of students, and how we then move using this and mediate through a lot of discourse, further cognitive conflict, more thinking about our own thinking, to develop the kind of objective theories and models of science. And then finally, Derek Hodgson, he worked in Manchester, in Toronto, in Oise, and is presently in New Zealand. And he's one of the deepest thinkers about the idea of how we can get students with their personal beliefs and ideas, how we can actually create a curriculum that teaches them about learning the science, the scientific principles, the objective knowledge, learning about the nature of science, how science proceeds, the social nature, the methodological, and also to get students involved in doing some authentic science.